The rain was blinding, hammering against the windshield when the headlights caught them. An Omega, shivering and desperate, clutching a small child at a desolate bus stop. With nowhere left to turn, a rugged, broken Alpha pulls over. An impulsive decision that will change both their lives forever. Hi everyone, I'm your host, and welcome to today's audiobook chapter. Please note that this version has been edited to comply with YouTube's guidelines. For the raw, uncensored experience, complete with steamy details, intense chemistry, and intimate moments you won't find here. Click the Patreon link in the description below. Join my community for exclusive, uncut access. Now let's begin. The rain in Oregon did not just fall. It battered the landscape with the force of a physical assault. Cale Ellis gripped the leather steering wheel of his truck, his knuckles white against the dark material. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The windshield wipers moved in a frantic, rhythmic blur, struggling to clear the deluge that turned the road into a blurred ribbon of slick asphalt. Cale's internal environment was as cold as the exterior. He kept his pheromones tight, locked down behind an impenetrable barrier of force suppression. The scent of peppermint, sharp, sterile, and biting, seeped from his skin, a remnant of a former life, a former status, and a former partner. He was an alpha, but he was a hollowed-out one. He functioned on autopilot. Work, drive, eat, sleep. The cycle was necessary. Any deviation from the routine invited chaos, and Cale had learned the hard way that chaos was a luxury he could no longer afford. The headlights cut through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the sodden forest lining the highway. Then they caught something else. Ahead, near a dilapidated bus shelter, two figures sat huddled. Cale's foot moved to the brake before his conscious brain processed the image. He skidded slightly on the wet road, the tires fighting for traction, before coming to a complete stop 50 feet past the shelter. He stared through the rearview mirror. Two people, an adult and a small child. They were soaked. The child was wrapped in a thin blanket that was doing nothing to repel the rain. Cale's instinct was to drive away. He had done it 100 times before. Ignoring the world was the safest strategy. But as he prepared to shift the truck back into gear, his olfactory senses betrayed him. A scent pierced through the heavy rain and the seal of his truck's cabin. It wasn't the peppermint of his own suppression, nor the damp, earthy smell of the storm. It was jasmine, faint, diluted by the cold, and laced with something bitter, cortisol. Fear. The scent hit Cale's system like a physical blow. It was an Omega in distress. The biological pull was instant, violent, and completely unwelcome. He threw the truck into reverse and backed up until he was parallel to the shelter. He rolled down the passenger side window. The wind and rain whipped inside, chilling his face, but he didn't care. "Get in," Cale commanded. His voice was gravelly, unused to speaking. Under the shelter, the adult figure flinched. Cale could see them now. A young man, skin pale, eyes wide and defensive. He was shielding the child with his own body. He held a bag, clutching it like a lifeline. "I said get in," Cale repeated, louder this time. "You're both going to develop hypothermia out here. This isn't a request." The man stood up, shivering violently. He didn't move toward the truck. "Who are you? Does it matter?" Cale gestured to the child, who was limp against the man's chest. "That kid isn't moving right. Move, or I'm leaving." The man hesitated, his gaze darting between the truck and the dark, empty road. The smell of jasmine hit Cale again, more concentrated now that the man was closer. It wasn't just the scent of an Omega in distress. It was the scent of someone who had reached the absolute edge of their endurance. The man dragged himself and the child toward the truck. Cale watched as he scrambled into the passenger seat, dripping water everywhere. The leather upholstery hissed as it made contact with the wet fabric of the man's clothes. "I'm Jesse," the man said, his teeth chattering. His eyes were fixed on Cale, wary and assessing. "And this is Leo. He's my brother." Cale didn't introduce himself. He slammed the truck into drive and pulled away, the engine roaring as he accelerated back onto the highway. The heater kicked on, blasting hot air into the cramped cabin. "He's burning up," Jesse said, his voice straining with panic. He was peeling back the wet blanket from the child. "He's been sick for 2 days. I couldn't get the fever down." Cale glanced over. The boy, Leo, was barely conscious. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow and rapid. "How long have you been at that bus stop?" Cale asked. "Since noon." Cale's grip on the wheel tightened until the leather creaked. 12 hours in the rain. "I have a first aid kit in the back," Cale said, his voice clipped. "There's water in the center console. Use it." Jesse reached for the water, his hands trembling so violently he fumbled with the cap. He didn't take a sip himself. He immediately began dabbing the boy's forehead. "You're a nurse," Cale stated. It wasn't a question. Jesse froze, his gaze snapping to Cale. "How did you know that?" "You're checking his pulse points and monitoring his breathing rhythm while you try to hydrate him. Most people just scream and shake the kid." Jesse looked away, his jaw working. "I was a nurse." "Not anymore." Cale didn't press. He kept his eyes on the road, his mind churning. The scent of jasmine was filling the cab, competing with the scent of wet clothes and the boy's feverish heat. Cale felt his own peppermint scent beginning to waver, the barrier he had spent 4 years perfecting showing microscopic cracks. He had to keep the alpha side of him in check. He was not looking for a project, and he certainly wasn't looking for an omega. "We're 10 minutes from my place," Cale said, his voice flat. "I have a spare room. You can dry off, stabilize the kid, and then you figure out where you're going tomorrow." "I can't," Jesse started, his voice rising. "Don't," Cale interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Don't give me the pride speech. The kid is dying of pneumonia or something worse. You want to save him? Shut up and let me get you out of the rain." Jesse went silent. He leaned his head against the cold window glass, closing his eyes. The truck hit a pothole, and the boy groaned, a low, wheezing sound that made Jesse gasp. "He's cold," Jesse whispered, panic rising again. "Why is he so cold?" "The fever broke," Cale said, his voice dropping into that calm, authoritative tone he used to use for subordinates. "Or he's crashing. We're almost there. Just keep him talking." "Leo? Leo, look at me." Jesse shook the boy's shoulder. The boy opened his eyes, glassy and unfocused. He looked at Jesse, then shifted his gaze to Cale. He didn't see the driver, not really. He was slipping. "We're home in 5, Cale said. He didn't look at Jesse again until they pulled into the long, gravel driveway of his isolated property. The house was a structure of stone and timber, set back against the edge of the woods. No neighbors for miles. Cale parked the truck and killed the engine. The silence of the night rushed back in, punctuated only by the fading hiss of the rain. "Out," Cale said. He opened his door and stepped out into the downpour. He didn't wait for Jesse. He walked around to the passenger side, threw the door open, and watched as Jesse struggled to unbuckle his seatbelt with his frozen, numb fingers. "He can't walk," Jesse said, desperation coloring his voice. Cale reached in, his large hands easily scooping the limp child into his arms. The boy was light, far too light. "Move," Cale ordered. Jesse tumbled out of the truck, legs shaking, and followed Cale toward the front porch. The key was already in Cale's hand. He unlocked the heavy timber door and stepped into the entryway, flipping the light switch. The house was clean, sparse, and cold. "Living room," Cale said, nodding toward the leather sofa. "Put him there. I'll get the heat up and some towels." Jesse didn't hesitate. He hurried to the sofa, laying the boy down carefully. He stood over him, his chest heaving, water dripping from his hair onto the floor. He looked at the room, at the sparse furniture, then back at Cale. "Thank you," Jesse said, the words barely audible. Cale ignored the gratitude. It was meaningless to him. He went to the closet, pulled out 2 thick wool blankets and a pile of towels, and threw them onto the sofa. "Strip him," Cale said. "Get the wet clothes off." I'm gonna make the fireplace and get the temperature up. Jesse turned to the boy, his hands moving with surgical precision as he began to unbutton the sodden shirt. Cale turned away, walking into the kitchen. He needed distance. He needed to be anywhere other than in the same room as the scent of jasmine. He struck a match to the fireplace, the flames catching quickly on the dry wood. As the warmth began to radiate through the room, Cale leaned his hands against the mantel, staring into the fire. He could hear Jesse moving behind him, the sound of fabric tearing and the soft, urgent murmurs of an Omega trying to comfort a child. He turned around. Jesse was sitting on the edge of the sofa, wrapped in a dry towel, his hair matted and dark against his pale forehead. He had the boy bundled in the wool blankets, held tight against his chest. The boy's breathing had evened out, a steady, shallow rise and fall. "He's stable," Jesse said, looking up at Cale. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gaunt. I think the fever is subsiding." Cale didn't move from the fireplace. "Good. You stay here. Don't touch anything in the back hallway." Jesse nodded, his expression guarded again. The gratitude from minutes ago was being replaced by the instinct to protect himself. He knew he was in the house of a stranger, a powerful alpha who was keeping his own sense under heavy lock and key. "Why did you stop?" Jesse asked, his voice low. Cale looked at him, really looked at him. He saw the bruises on Jesse's wrists, the way he flinched when the floorboards creaked. He saw the remnants of a life that had been systematically dismantled. "Because," Cale said, his voice hard, "I know what it's like to be left in the rain." He turned and walked toward his own bedroom, leaving Jesse alone with the child and the fire. He closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, his heart rate finally beginning to decelerate. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the steady thud of his own pulse. The scent of jasmine had followed him into the room, clinging to the air like a ghost. He closed his eyes, the image of Jesse's desperate, tired face burned into his retinas. The storm outside continued to rage, a wall of water and wind separating them from the rest of the world. Cale Ellis, the man who had abandoned everything to exist in silence, had just ensured that silence was over. The morning sun didn't make it through the thick tree line surrounding Cale's property until well after 8. Inside the house, the silence was absolute. Cale was already in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee, his movements mechanical. He had showered, shaved, and dressed in heavy work gear. He was preparing for his shift at the construction site. He heard the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Jesse emerged from the office, looking haggard but composed. He was wearing one of Cale's old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows. He held Leo's hand. The boy was walking, albeit slowly, clearly drained but fever-free. "He's up," Jesse said. His voice was guarded. He didn't thank Cale again. He stood in the kitchen doorway, clearly unsure of the hierarchy in this space. "Kitchen is yours for 10 minutes, Cale said, not turning around. "Eat, then get out of my way. I have work." Jesse walked to the cabinets, opening them with practiced efficiency. He didn't ask where things were, he just looked. Cale watched him out of the corner of his eye. Jesse found the oatmeal, the pots, and the spoons without hesitation. It was annoying how quickly he assimilated into the space. "I need to go to the store," Jesse said, keeping his back to Cale. "Leo needs fresh produce, soft foods. I can't keep him on rations." "There's money in the jar on the counter," Cale said gruffly. "Take what you need. Don't go into town and talk to anyone. Keep it local. The market 2 miles down is empty this time of day." Jesse turned, his brow furrowed. "I'm not a prisoner, Cale." "You're a liability," Cale countered, finally facing him. "You're an Omega with a kid in a town where people talk. If you want to stay here, you keep a low profile. I don't need the local gossip mill focused on my house." Jesse's eyes flashed with anger, but he forced it down. He grabbed a bowl and started the oatmeal. They ate in silence. Cale left the house without another word, slamming the heavy door behind him. The day stretched out. Jesse spent the morning cleaning. It wasn't out of servitude. It was out of a need to reclaim order. He scrubbed the kitchen counters, organized the pantry, and swept the living room. He kept Leo in the office with books and coloring supplies. When the clock hit 3, Jesse checked Leo. The fever was gone, but the boy was lethargic. Jesse needed supplies, antibiotics, electrolyte solution, and real food. He packed Leo into the small satchel he'd managed to save and grabbed the keys to Cale's spare truck, which Cale had begrudgingly tossed on the table. He drove to the local market. It was a small, dusty place. Jesse was cautious. He kept his head down, grabbing only the essentials. He felt exposed, his omega scent still clinging to his skin, even if he tried to mask it with soap. He was at the checkout when he heard it. A conversation between two men by the door. "That truck," one said. "Isn't that the recluse's vehicle? The one who lives on the ridge?" "Yeah, must be. Haven't seen that truck out in months." Jesse paid, his heart hammering. He didn't linger. He hurried back to the truck, his senses on high alert. When he returned to the house, Cale was already back. He was sitting on the porch steps, boots off, sharpening a hunting knife. He looked up as the truck pulled in. His eyes tracked Jesse's every movement as he got out of the car. "You were gone too long," Cale said. "I got what I needed," Jesse retorted, hauling the bags toward the door. Cale stood up, blocking his path. He moved with the effortless grace of a predator. He was taller, broader, and radiated an intensity that made Jesse stop dead. "Did you talk to anyone?" Cale asked. He stepped closer. The peppermint scent rolled off him, cold and hard. "I didn't speak a word," Jesse said, holding his ground. He smelled the alpha scent, peppermint, forest, and something metallic, like dry blood. Cale leaned in, his nose inches from Jesse's neck. He wasn't kissing him. He was smelling him. It was an interrogation. Cale inhaled deeply, searching for any trace of an outside scent. Jesse's breath hitched. He felt the heat radiating off Cale. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "Back off," Jesse whispered. Cale pulled away, his expression unreadable. "Get inside. And don't go out again without asking." Jesse brushed past him, his heart rate erratic. Inside, he dropped the bags and leaned against the counter, trying to stop his hands from shaking. That evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. Jesse had prepared a dinner of soup and bread. Cale sat at the table, eating quickly, his eyes darting toward the office where Leo was asleep. "He's a good kid," Cale said suddenly, breaking the silence. Jesse looked up, surprised. "He's my brother. I'm raising him. Parents? Dead," Jesse said flatly. "Car accident. 3 years ago." Cale paused, his fork hovering. He understood that. He knew the hollow ache of being left behind. "My wife," Cale muttered. "Cancer." Jesse stared at him. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unadorned. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Cale said. "It's just life. You survive or you don't." "You're a nurse," Cale said, pivoting the conversation. "Why stop?" "I couldn't work there anymore," Jesse said, his voice tightening. "They were cutting corners, using cheap meds. I tried to speak up. I got fired." "You have credentials?" "In my bag. They didn't take them. They just took my badge." Cale nodded slowly. He stood up and walked to a drawer in the kitchen, pulling out a thick, dusty file. He tossed it on the table. "I have a friend," Cale said. "Runs a private clinic in the city. Needs staff who aren't afraid of breaking rules." Jesse stared at the file. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you," Cale said, walking toward the door. "I'm getting you a job so you can afford to leave. When the kid is better, you're out." He left the room, leaving Jesse alone with the file. Late that night, Jesse was in the kitchen, tidying up, when he heard a crash from the bedroom. He dropped the towel and ran. He burst into the room Cale used as a workspace. Cale was on the floor, surrounded by scattered blueprints and heavy books. He was clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in agony. A scar, jagged and white, was pulling across his skin.
Kyle!
Jesse rushed to his side. Get out! Cale growled, sweat beading on his forehead. It's nothing. It's not nothing. It's an old wound, probably nerve damage, Jesse said, his nurse instincts overriding his caution. He moved Cale's hand away. The shoulder was inflamed, red and angry. You need heat and compression. You've been overexerting it. Cale tried to stand, but he stumbled. Jesse caught him, bracing him. The contact was electric. Cale's body was a furnace, burning with alpha heat. I said get out, Cale hissed, his voice dropping into a growl. And I said you need help, Jesse snapped back. I'm not letting you walk around like a cripple because you're too stubborn to admit you're human. He forced Cale to sit on the edge of the bed. He went to the bathroom, grabbed a warm towel, and returned. He didn't ask for permission. He reached for Cale's shirt, his fingers brushing against the rough fabric. Don't, Cale warned. Be quiet, Jesse commanded. He stripped the shirt off. Cale's back was a landscape of scars. He had been through hell. Jesse felt a surge of something. Not just pity, but a profound, aching understanding. He began to apply the warm compress, his hands moving with gentle authority. Cale let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension in his muscles began to melt, just a fraction. Jesse kept working, his hands lingering on the warm skin. He felt the pulse in Cale's neck, the rapid rhythm of a heart fighting to stay contained. You should get more rest, Jesse said softly. Cale opened his eyes, staring at the back of Jesse's head. Why are you still here? Because Leo needs a roof and you need a nurse, Jesse said. That's not the reason, Cale murmured. Jesse stopped moving. He turned around, his face inches from Cale's chest. The air was thick, charged with potential. Maybe, Jesse whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, caught in the gravity of the room, before Cale pulled away, grabbing his shirt and jerking it on. He stood up, avoiding Jesse's eyes. Go to sleep, Cale said, his voice rough. Jesse stood there, watching him. He knew they had crossed a line. The air was changed. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was heavy with questions they weren't ready to answer. Good night, Cale, Jesse said. He left the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, the storm was just beginning. The morning was heavy with humidity. Cale was in the garage, working on the truck's suspension, his sleeves pushed up, exposing forearms corded with muscle. Jesse was in the kitchen, measuring out formula for Leo. The atmosphere in the house was unusually stable for the past few days. That changed when the black SUV pulled into the gravel drive. Cale stopped his wrench mid-turn. He didn't recognize the vehicle, but he recognized the scent. It was sulfur, synthetic musk, and arrogance. It was the scent of a predator, and it didn't belong on his property. Cale dropped the tool and walked out of the garage. By the time he reached the porch, the SUV door had slammed shut. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit that looked out of place in the rugged Oregon landscape. He had the posture of an alpha who owned the room he walked into. This was Marcus. Jesse appeared at the front door a second later, holding Leo. When he saw Marcus, the color drained from his face. The smell of jasmine spiked, turning from sweet to sharp, acidic with terror. Jesse, Marcus said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and devoid of warmth. He didn't look at Cale. He looked only at Jesse. You've been hard to find. Get off my property, Jesse said. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped Leo. Cale stepped off the porch, positioning himself between Jesse and the intruder. You heard him. Leave. Marcus finally shifted his gaze to Cale. He smirked. And you must be the caretaker, the charity worker. I'm the one who decides who stays on this land, Cale said. His own pheromones began to leak. Not the suppressed peppermint, but a low, vibrating hum of aggression. You have 10 seconds to get back in that SUV before I start throwing you off the property myself. I'm not here for you, Ellis, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing. I'm here for the boy, and the assets Jesse stole from the clinic. I didn't steal anything, Jesse shouted. I took proof of the medical malpractice. Proof of what you were doing to the patients. The boy, Marcus repeated, ignoring Jesse. He's not yours, Jesse. He's a ward of the state now. Give him to me, and we can end this without things getting messy. He stays, Cale said. Marcus lunged. It wasn't a warning. It was an ambush. Cale reacted on instinct, sidestepping the initial blow. Marcus wasn't a brawler. He was a trained combatant. He came at Cale with a series of precise strikes, aiming for the joints, aiming to incapacitate. Cale absorbed the hits, his body taking the impact with grim efficiency. He shoved Marcus back, but the man was fast. Marcus pulled a switchblade from his jacket. The metal glinted in the sunlight. Cale saw the strike coming too late. He twisted, trying to deflect the blade, but the knife grazed his side, slicing through his shirt and into his flesh. Hot blood sprayed onto the gravel. Cale didn't scream. He grunted, a guttural sound of pure aggression. He caught Marcus's wrist and slammed his forehead into the man's nose. There was a sickening crunch. Marcus staggered back, blood pouring from his face. Get inside, Cale roared at Jesse. Jesse didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted for the house. Leo held tight to his chest and slammed the heavy door, locking the deadbolt. Outside, Marcus wiped the blood from his nose, his eyes wild. He looked at the knife, then at Cale, who was pressing his hand against his side, blood seeping between his fingers. You're making a mistake, Ellis, Marcus spat. He's a liability. You're ruining your life for a broken Omega. Get out, Cale said, his voice dropping, dangerous and low. Before I find a shovel and bury you under the pines. Marcus looked at the house, then back at Cale. He realized he wasn't going to win this round. He spat on the ground, returned to his SUV, and drove away, tires kicking up gravel. Cale stood in the driveway for a moment, waiting until the dust settled. Then he staggered. The world tilted. The pain in his side was a hot, pulsing rhythm. He walked to the door, opened it, and collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Jesse was there in an instant. He had dropped Leo in the living room and rushed to the kitchen when he heard the door open. Kyle! Cale hit the floor hard. His vision was swimming. I'm fine. You're bleeding out, Jesse snapped. His nurse persona took over. He grabbed a kitchen towel and pressed it against Cale's side. The towel turned crimson instantly. Get up. I need to get you to the table. Can't walk, Cale muttered. Jesse shoved his shoulder under Cale's arm, grunting with the effort. He hauled Cale up. Cale leaned his weight on the smaller man, his body heavy and burning with fever. They shuffled to the kitchen table. Jesse shoved the chairs aside and hoisted Cale onto the surface. I need to stitch this, Jesse said. He was already pulling the first aid kit out of the cupboard, his hands moving with efficient speed. He grabbed the antiseptic and the sutures. It's deep. You're going to need to hold still. Cale gripped the edge of the table. Do it. Jesse cut away Cale's shirt. The skin beneath was pale, streaked with red. He poured the antiseptic over the wound. Cale's back arched, his jaw clenching so hard it cracked. Breathe, Jesse commanded, pressing his hand firmly onto Cale's shoulder to keep him steady. Breathe with me. Jesse leaned in close, his scent filling the small space. He deliberately released a wave of jasmine pheromones, not out of panic but out of control. It was a soothing, grounding scent, meant to lower the alpha's heart rate. Cale's breathing slowed. The agony was still there, but the panic began to recede. Jesse tied off the final stitch, his movement steady. Cale slumped forward, his forehead resting against Jesse's side, his breathing ragged. The silence was thick, filled only with the aftermath of their close call. Cale looked up, his eyes dark with a mix of lingering pain and raw, unspoken need. You stayed, Cale breathed. I'm not going anywhere, Jesse replied. Cale didn't wait. He pulled Jesse closer, their lips colliding in a kiss that tasted of salt and adrenaline. It was the kiss of a man who had stared at death and clawed his way back. Cale's hands found Jesse's waist, pulling him flush against the table, a silent demand for proximity. Jesse met him with equal intensity, fingers gripping Cale's shoulders, anchors in the sudden electric storm of their pheromones. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a magnetism that made their heartbeats race. When Jesse finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against one another as they struggled to steady their pulses. Cale didn't let go. He held Jesse tight, burying his face in the crook of Jesse's neck, inhaling deeply. He wasn't just catching his breath. He was anchoring himself to the only reality that mattered. They had survived. Jesse helped Cale down from the table. Cale leaned heavily on him, his body limp with exhaustion. They navigated the hallway to the bedroom, the weight of the day pressing down on them. "The bed," Jesse said. "You're taking the bed." "Both of us," Cale said, his voice weak but firm. Jesse didn't argue. He stripped the blankets back and helped Cale lie down. Cale groaned as his side hit the mattress, but he didn't pull away when Jesse climbed in beside him. Jesse lay on his side, watching Cale. The alpha's breathing was deep and ragged. He looked younger, less hardened, with his eyes closed. Jesse reached out, his hand hovering over Cale's chest, feeling the steady, slow rise and fall. "You're a fool, Cale Ellis," Jesse whispered. Cale's hand shot out, catching Jesse's wrist. He didn't open his eyes. "Maybe, but I'm alive." Jesse settled into the pillow, his body aching, his mind reeling. He had done it. He had protected Leo, he had defended his choices, and he had patched up the man who had given him shelter. He looked at the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. The danger wasn't gone. Marcus would be back. But for tonight, the war was paused. The house remained quiet, guarded by the woods and the darkness. Inside, the two of them slept, the bond between them solidified by blood, adrenaline, and the shared realization that they were no longer fighting for themselves. They were fighting for each other. The infection from Cale's side wound did not break. Instead, it festered. By the third day, Cale was not just battling the pain of a lacerated muscle. He was battling his own internal biology. The stress of the fight, the trauma of the injury, and the constant, lingering scent of Jesse in the house acted as a trigger. Cale Ellis was entering a rut. Outside, the Oregon sky turned black. The rain returned with a vengeance, the wind rattling the timber walls of the house until the structure groaned. The storm lines were down. They were isolated. Cale sat on the edge of the bed in his room, his shirt discarded. His skin was slick with sweat. His pupils were blown wide, black voids in the dim light. He gripped the bedposts, his muscles vibrating with the effort to remain stationary. Every instinct in his brain screamed at him to find an outlet. He wanted to hunt. He wanted to claim territory. He wanted to bury his face in the source of the jasmine scent that was driving him insane. The door creaked open. Jesse stood in the threshold. He wasn't carrying a medical kit. He was carrying a tray of water and broth. He stopped dead when he caught the scent. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the musk of a dominant alpha. It wasn't just the scent of peppermint anymore. It was something wilder, deeper, smelling of earth and raw power. Jesse took a step back, his own instincts flaring. His Omega side recognized the danger immediately. This was a cornered predator.
"Kyle?"
Jesse asked. His voice didn't waver. Cale didn't look at him. His head was hanging low, his chest heaving. "Get out," Cale growled. The sound was distorted, deeper than normal. "Get out of the house. Take the boy and go to the garage. Lock the door." "You're in rut," Jesse stated. It wasn't a question. He set the tray down on the floor and closed the door behind him. "I said get out." Cale lunged, but the movement was sloppy. He slipped, catching himself on the bed frame. The stitches in his side pulled, tearing slightly. Blood welled up, bright and fresh. Jesse ignored the command. He moved toward the bed. You're bleeding. You're burning up with fever and you're in the middle of a chemical cycle. If you don't stabilize, you're gonna go into shock. I am in control, Cale hissed, his teeth bared. You're not. Jesse reached for the bandages, but Cale's hand shot out, grabbing Jesse's wrist. The contact sent a shockwave through the room. Cale jerked Jesse closer, the momentum pulling the Omega onto the bed. Jesse landed hard against Cale's chest, the heat radiating from the Alpha's skin intense. Cale buried his face in the crook of Jesse's neck, inhaling deeply. The jasmine scent was like oxygen to a drowning man. You smell like safety, Cale groaned. Jesse cupped Cale's face, forcing the Alpha to look at him. I'm here. You're not alone. Cale kissed him. It was a rough, desperate collision of lips, a raw biological necessity. Jesse didn't pull back. He wrapped his arms around Cale's neck, surrendering to the overwhelming pheromone cloud. The room seemed to spin. When Cale's skin touched Jesse's, it felt like sparks. Mark me, Jesse whispered. Cale didn't hesitate. He pulled Jesse into his embrace, his body heavy and insistent. This wasn't just about the physical. It was an act of erasure. Cale needed to overwrite the world with his own scent. Cale was a force of nature, his pheromones acting as a narcotic that dulled Jesse's ability to think, leaving only the ability to feel. The scent of peppermint and musk filled the room, becoming their only reality. Mine, Cale growled, his voice guttural. Jesse arched into him, his fingernails digging into Cale's back. He didn't care about the intensity, he cared about the connection. He needed to be part of the man who had stopped in the rain. Cale's control shattered, his movements dictated by the primal need to bond. When the moment of fusion hit, it was a blinding, white-hot explosion. Cale held Jesse tight, his teeth finding the sensitive gland on the side of Jesse's neck. He bit down. The pain was transformative. It was the sensation of two separate circuits being fused together. The mark, the bond, settled into place. A permanent, searing tether that didn't just join their bodies, but fused their souls. Cale collapsed, his weight pressing Jesse into the mattress. He didn't move. He lay there, his breathing heavy, his forehead resting against Jesse's. Jesse reached up, his hand stroking Cale's damp hair. The silence in the house was no longer filled with the storm. It was filled with the rhythmic sound of their heartbeats, syncing up. It's done, Cale whispered. His voice was clearer, the guttural distortion gone. The rut was subsiding, replaced by the crushing exhaustion of the aftermath. Jesse nodded. He felt the mark on his neck throbbing, a pulse that matched Cale's own. He reached up, touching the spot where the skin was broken. He wasn't scared. For the first time in his life, the constant low-level hum of anxiety that had defined his existence was gone, replaced by a steady, unwavering calm. I'm sorry, Cale murmured, his eyes searching Jesse's face. I didn't mean for this to happen. Don't, Jesse said, pulling the blankets up over them. Don't apologize for surviving. Cale pulled Jesse closer, tucking the Omega into his chest. He was hyper-aware of everything. The way Jesse's heart beat, the way the air moved in the room, the scent of the bond that was now uniquely theirs. It wasn't just jasmine and peppermint anymore. It was something new, a blend that belonged only to them. Outside, the storm broke. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then stopped. They lay there in the dark, tethered by the mark on Jesse's neck, listening to the drip of water from the eaves. The house was quiet. The war outside was still waiting for them. But inside the bedroom, the world had been rewritten. They slept, exhausted and entwined, the marks of the night visible on their skin, but the mark of the bond invisible, etched permanently into their souls. The danger of the outside world was imminent, but for this moment, in this house, they were a singular, unified entity. The sun filtered into the bedroom, painting the walls in pale, dust-mote-filled light. Cale woke first. He didn't move. He lay still, his entire sensory system calibrated to the presence of the man sleeping against his chest. The bond was active, a constant, low-level thrum in the back of his mind. It wasn't intrusive. It was anchoring. He could feel Jesse's heartbeat, a steady, rhythmic cadence against his ribs. Jesse stirred. He didn't open his eyes immediately, but the mental tether spiked with a flare of warmth. He was awake and he was content. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They understood each other's thoughts as clearly as their own. Marcus didn't wait long. By noon, the black SUV returned, accompanied by a second car. 3 men stepped out. They weren't there for a negotiation. They were there to finish the job. Cale stood on the porch, his hand resting on the back of his belt. He felt Jesse beside him. The bond allowed them to move in perfect synchronization. Cale didn't have to look at Jesse to know he was ready. "Marcus," Cale called out, his voice steady. "This is your last warning. Leave." Marcus stood by his car, a grimace on his face. "You think you can hide here forever, Ellis? I have legal papers. I have a court order. Give me the kid and the boy and you walk away." "You don't have a court order," Jesse said, stepping forward. "You have forged documents, and the local sheriff is already on his way. He has the real evidence." Marcus's eyes widened. "What?" "I kept the files," Jesse continued, his voice calm. "I sent copies to the district attorney and the medical board. Your clinic isn't just closed, Marcus. You're under investigation for systematic fraud and endangerment." Marcus roared, losing his composure. "Get them!" The 3 men rushed the porch. Cale didn't hesitate. He dropped the pretense of restraint. He moved off the porch, meeting the first attacker halfway. He didn't fight with the rage of the previous encounter. He fought with the precision of a trained soldier. He moved, pivoted, and struck. Jesse didn't stay back. He moved to Cale's side. The bond gave them a tactical advantage that was almost unfair. Cale could sense where an attacker was coming from before they entered his line of sight, and Jesse compensated by anticipating Cale's defensive posture. It was a dance of violence. Cale took a blow to the ribs, but he used the momentum to drive his elbow into the attacker's jaw, knocking him cold. Jesse grabbed a heavy wooden cane from the porch and tripped the second man, finishing him with a precise strike to the temple. Marcus pulled a pistol. Cale pinned Marcus to the dirt, his forearm pressed against the man's throat. "It's over," Cale growled. Marcus clawed at Cale's arm, his face turning purple. "You're nothing," he choked out. "I'm the one standing," Cale said. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights cut through the afternoon haze as a sheriff's cruiser and 2 patrol cars tore up the driveway. The authorities had arrived. The aftermath was clinical. Marcus and his men were handcuffed and loaded into the cruisers. The sheriff, a man Cale had known for years, walked up to the porch. He looked at the scene, the defeated men, the evidence scattered on the gravel, and then at Cale and Jesse. "We have everything we need," the sheriff said. "It's over, Cale." As the cruisers drove away, the silence of the woods returned, but it felt different, felt clean. That night, the adrenaline finally crashed. The house was quiet. Leo was asleep in his room. Cale and Jesse sat on the floor of the living room, their backs against the sofa. Cale pulled Jesse into his arms, his grip firm, almost possessive. This wasn't a gentle greeting. It was a claim. The kiss was deep, fueled by the raw, pent-up energy of the last few days, and Jesse met him with equal fire. The air in the room grew heavy, saturated with the intoxicating collision of Cale's sharp peppermint and Jesse's sweet, floral jasmine. They moved together, bodies colliding in the dark, driven by an instinct older than words. Every touch sent a jolt through the bond, a physical reminder that they were no longer 2 separate souls. It was intense, unhurried, and saturated with the relief of finally being home. As they surrendered to the rhythm of their connection, the world outside ceased to exist. All that mattered was the heat, the heartbeat against heartbeat, and the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other. 6 months later, the clinic was a small, well-lit building on the edge of town, converted from an old warehouse. It was busy, but it was organized. Jesse stood behind the reception desk, checking a chart. He looked up as the front door opened. Cale walked in, holding Leo's hand. The boy was taller, healthier, his eyes bright with energy. "Lunch," Cale said, setting a bag of sandwiches on the counter. Jesse smiled. It was a genuine, full-faced smile that reached his eyes. He walked around the counter, kissed Cale, and then ruffled Leo's hair. "You finished the paperwork?" Jesse asked. "Done," Cale said. "Everything is filed." They walked back to the break room. It wasn't the life Cale had planned 4 years ago. He had planned to live in silence, to die in the shadows of his own grief. He hadn't planned for an Omega to walk into his life, smelling of jasmine and desperation. He hadn't planned for a bond or for a family. The clinic was thriving. They were helping people, serving the community, and building a foundation that couldn't be shaken. Marcus was in prison. The past was buried. They sat down to eat, the three of them, a makeshift family that had become the only thing that mattered. "Dad," Leo said, looking at Cale, "can we go to the park after this?" Cale smiled, a real smile that softened the hard lines of his face. He looked at Jesse, who was watching him with a look of pure, unadulterated love. "Yeah, kid," Cale said. "We can go to the park." They finished their lunch in the quiet hum of the clinic, the sound of the world outside muffled and distant. They had built a life from the wreckage, a sanctuary against the storm. And as Cale reached across the table to take Jesse's hand, the bond whispered back a simple, undeniable truth. "We are home." Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey with Cale and Jesse. We hope their story of finding hope in the darkest of storms touched your heart as much as it did ours. Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters lead to the greatest chapters of our lives, and choosing to help someone else is often the best way to save yourself. If this story of second chances and unconditional love resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Remember, your story isn't over yet. From the coldest storm to a newfound home, they finally found the wholeness they both desperately needed. If you loved this chapter, remember that this is only the tip of the iceberg. To unlock the full, raw, and steamy versions of these scenes, including all the intense chemistry and private details left uncut, make sure to click the Patreon link in the description below. Join the community today for exclusive access to every uncensored moment. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow that link to see the full story. See you over there.